Well, let's start with the question of tolerance. Tolerance implies that you disagree with something, right? I mean, you don't tolerate things you agree with. You agree with those things, right? And the other interesting aspect of tolerance is typically when you ask for tolerance, many times you're implying you're doing something wrong. You don't have to ask for tolerance if you're, say, feeding the poor or helping the needy. You don't have to ask for tolerance for that. Normally, you're asking for tolerance when you're doing something that is wrong. Now, Christians aren't called to be tolerant. Christians are called to be loving. You see, tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them, but love says reach out and help them. And there are ways to love people that mean that you don't tolerate what they do. I mean, every parent knows, Chris, that if you tolerate everything your kid wants to do, you're not loving. You're unloving. You have to stand in the way of evil or harmful things that your kid wants to do. You can't approve of everything your kid wants to do. Love does not require approval. Love requires truth. Even the Apostle Paul says that love rejoices in the truth. We don't rejoice in unrighteousness, we rejoice in righteousness. So we're to tolerate people and love people, but that doesn't mean we should tolerate or accept everything somebody wants to do. Notice the cancel culture doesn't tolerate people who disagree with them. They try and cancel them. They try and stop them. They try and prevent them from making a living. This is not tolerance. And so I think when you're dealing with people who are demanding tolerance on one hand, but are not tolerating your position on another, you need to call them on that. You need to say, first of all, if you're all for tolerance, why aren't you tolerating my opinion? Why are you trying to shut me down? Why are you trying to cancel me? It was John Stuart Mill who said something like, all claims of, he didn't say it exactly this way, but he's saying when you're trying to cancel somebody, when you're trying to shut somebody up, you're claiming to be infallible, right? It's a claim to infallibility. You say, I can't tolerate what you have to say. I can't tolerate your position. I need to shut you up. Well, if you're saying you need to shut somebody else up, what are you implicitly implying? You're implying that you're infallible and you can't learn anything.
You're ending the conversation. You're not trying to have a conversation or to be a good listener, which is what makes for a good conversation.
We probably wouldn't have gotten rid of slavery if we shut down all opposing opinions. We wouldn't have. We would say, if we canceled everybody who was an abolitionist, if we canceled everybody who said, hey, these people are human beings, don't treat them this way, we never would have gotten rid of slavery. So if you want to make moral progress, you have to be open to free speech. If you're not open to free speech, you're not interested in moral progress.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I find that a lot of people nowadays are just avoiding conversations altogether because they don't want the fire. They don't want to feel like every time they want to communicate with someone, maybe where there might be a disagreement or not seeing things the same way, that it's going to go south.
Well, that's why I think, Chris, sometimes you got to preface the conversation with questions. So if somebody asks you, suppose they ask you, what are your personal pronouns or something, and you don't want to buy into that worldview. One question you can ask is, do you consider yourself a tolerant person? Why do you ask that question? Because the other person is probably going to say yes. And then you can say, great, because if I have an opinion different than yours, you'll tolerate it then, right? Okay. So when you say, look, I don't have a personal pronoun, I'm a male, so I don't buy into the idea that you have personal pronouns. You call men men and women women, right? They have to tolerate that if they claim to be a tolerant person. So I think you can ask questions rather than making statements. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person? See what they say.
Yeah, no, you're right, and the best person to ever do it was Jesus himself. He would question. He would return his answer to questions would be questions.
That's right. Yeah.
It's hard to say. I couldn't quite get it out myself. But he was so good at it because it forces this insight. It forces perspective. It forces reflection. It forces a deeper understanding of what it is that you're speaking on with someone. And it forces you to have an opinion and to be able to explain yourself and your position on things. And nowadays, people just kind of seem to go with the wind. They don't seem to have anything foundation to rest their belief system on.
I think that's why asking questions can be very effective when you run into these issues. Like, for example, going back to the transgender issue or the personal pronoun issue, you can also say this. Do you think it's right for me to try to force you to disobey your conscience? The other person's going to have to say, well, of course not. It wouldn't be right for you to force me to disobey my conscience. Then you can say, well, please don't try and force me to disobey mine then. Because that's what you're doing when you're saying, I have to see things a certain way. I have to do things a certain way according to what you say. You are in effect, violating my conscience, just like I would be violating yours if I requested you to do something that you felt or you thought was against your conscience.
Yes. No, very, very well said. And I think any listener right now can certainly understand that we all, when you hear truth, when you hear things like this said, they just seem so much more sensible and reasonable than the alternative. And we've been fed the alternative for what seems like years now, the better part of 10 or more years. And it's kind of like this slow, they gain an inch every so many weeks or months or years, and then it's kind of like the slow death. It's like it starts off small, and it's okay. I can accept that. I can deal with that. I can, life will go on. But over the course of time, with these little bites and these little changes and these little, acceptable things that go against our truth or what our conscience tells us, things can spiral out of control.
It may be difficult. It may be difficult to change the culture. It is. It's a big ship. But while we might not be able to change the culture very much, we can certainly prevent the culture from changing us. And so we need to stand for the truth, because our allegiance is to God, not to the latest cultural fad. And secondly, the way you love people is to tell them the truth. You don't love people by affirming them in error. And for example, I know there are people that struggle with transgenderism, or gender dysphoria, we might say. We don't want to minimize their struggle. Yet we don't help them by affirming their mismatch between their psychology and their biology. Maybe an analogy will help. You might ask somebody who is for transgender ideology to say, how would you help somebody who is suffering from anorexia? Because that person has a mismatch between their mind and their body. You certainly wouldn't say, you're correct, you're dangerously overweight, when in fact they're dangerously underweight. You wouldn't say, let me give you an operation, let me give you a liposuction. That person wouldn't need liposuction. That person would need psychiatry and medicine and food to help them recover. Yet, why do we think that affirming somebody in their mind, when their mind disagrees with their body, that we're helping them? Do you know that people that actually have so-called gender reassignment surgery have a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general public? 19 times higher. How do we think it's good? How do we think we're helping them by affirming them to go down that road? To go down that particular road, which has been shown to be very dangerous. We're not helping them by affirming that. Just like we wouldn't help an anorexic by affirming that they get liposuction. So if we're truly going to help people, we have to tell them the truth. Now, we need to be kind. We need to be sensitive when we tell them that truth. But affirming an error is never the right way.